It was considered a police action, America's forgotten war. Yet 150,000 American servicemen were killed, wounded, or missing. Find out one man's brutal yet unforgettable story next on Joni.
To have a violent temper, a man who liked to solve any disagreement with his fist, a man who was so determined to run from God that he requested and received a military assignment to Japan because he knew there were a few churches there. Ironically, it was in the Far East that Dallas Plemmons found God. Only a few months later, the Korean War began, and this man, who had once craved violence, experienced things no human being should have to go through. But in the midst of an unspeakable horror, there were many miracles. Miracles you will now hear about from the man himself. Please welcome Dallas Plemmons. Bless you, Dallas. Good to have you here. Bless your heart. Have a seat there. Now let's see, Dallas Plemmons, welcome. So glad that you're here today.
Thank you. What a joy to be here with you.
You know, I just appreciate you sharing your story. And I'll just say right here at the beginning that Dallas has written a book, Hell in the Land of the Morning Calm, and it is his story. And of course, he was involved in the Korean War and a war veteran. So for all of you out there that may be watching that have ever been involved in any type of military conflict, etc., we want you to be sure and stay tuned because you're going to understand God's faithfulness when you hear Dallas and his story. Well, let's just start at the beginning, and I don't know how much we can get in here, but I'm going to just turn you loose and let you tell your story. I appreciate you sharing your story. I know it's going to be a great encouragement. I believe there are going to be people watching today. You have felt like, you know, I've been through the most difficult situations. You know, I don't know where God is. I mean, it's like I can't hear his voice. It's like I'm lonely. I feel left out. I feel abandoned. I feel like there's no hope. Well, stay right where you are because you want to hear the testimony today of Dallas Plemmons. Well, start us at the beginning, and let's see how much we can get in.
Well, the beginning was that I was unhappy because of the way I saw my grandfather, who was a minister, treated. And I thought it was terrible. So I was running from the Lord. Mm-hmm. Well, when you run from the Lord, it just goes from bad to worse. And I ended up an alcoholic, smoked 3 packages of cigarettes a day, and eventually ended up in Japan with the U.S. Army. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning in a foxhole that I had come to the end of myself. Mm-hmm. And I had just consumed a big barbershop-sized bottle of bay rum shaving lotion because I couldn't find any alcohol. And that, of course, that had alcohol in it quite a bit. And I was quite inebriated, or for you up and outers, drunk, in that hole. And I just came to the end of myself. I can't stand this any longer. I can't take this any longer. And I said, Lord, you've got to do something for me. And he said, will you preach? I'd been running from that all my life. I knew that was the will of God for me, but I didn't want to do it. And I said, yes, Lord, I'll even do that if you'll help me. You know I can't get up in front of people and talk, but I can talk to sports writers and all this kind of stuff. See, the devil is such a big liar. But anyway, I said, I'll even do that. And way off in the heavens, It looked like a big ball of fire just came swirling through the air and exploded like this 4th of July stuff and floated down. And I wasn't conscious that any of it touched me. But the next thing that I was conscious of, now no one saw this but myself. The next thing I was conscious of, there was a group of men gathered around my hole. And 3 of them jumped down in the hole, and a couple of them pinned my arms down, and the other was slapping me in the face. And they thought I was hysterical because I'd just let out a big yell that I'd seen my grandmother do when she'd get happy, praying on top of the mountain. And I thought it looked like it helped Grandma, so I'm going to try it. And so I did. And so they're slapping me in the face, and they sent for the company commander, and he sent for the chaplain. Well, the chaplain said that I needed psychiatric treatment. Well, I probably did. But they shipped me off to Osaka General Hospital and kept me a few days, sent me back to duty, and said I was all right. Then I went up quite rapidly in rank after being saved, because they really didn't have a lot to pick from in that particular unit. If you'd do just halfway right, you'd go up in rank. And so I'd taken over one of the platoons as platoon sergeant, and was down in my room one day, and I heard this commotion out in the hall. And I opened the door and looked down the hall, and I saw this group of men gathered, and I knew it was going to be a fight. So it was men from my platoon, so I took off down to and walked between these 2 guys and pushed them apart. And one of them spit right between my eyes. And the devil jumped right up on both shoulders, and he says, even God don't expect you to take that. And I agreed with him. And just a split second before I would have hit him, that still small voice said, you're going to send it all down the drain, all those months of testimony, just to get to hit one person.
And here you are from the foxhole where you've had this Damascus Road experience. And now this is like, what, 6 months, 9 months later?
Something like that.
And I mean, the guys have seen this change take place. You're going this alcoholic.
They gave me a hard time.
Wow.
They tried everything they could to break me.
So you're standing there breaking up the fight. The guy spits on you, and you think for a moment, because you had kind of this fist thing going on. I mean, prior to knowing the Lord, where you would fight at the drop of a hat.
He wouldn't have even seen it coming. But he may not come exactly when you want him, but he'll come on time.
Right.
And he did. And so I just said, God bless you, and turned to walk away, and he spun me around, and he said, what'd you say? And I said, God bless you. He said, I thought that's what you said. He didn't believe it. Then I went on down to the room, and they were all still standing there watching when I closed the door, when I went in my room. And that night about 8 o'clock, Marvin knocked on the door. And
this is the guy who had spit on you.
Yes, and I led him to Jesus that night.
Wonderful. And
he became the closest friend I had. We traveled all over all 3 islands of Japan on weekends, and 3-day periods, and worked with missionaries and different people, winning Japanese people to the Lord.
So now Marvin became a wonderful friend, and at some point the war broke out.
Yes.
And you all were called basically to the front line, is that right?
Yes.
So what happened?
Immediately. Well, we were outnumbered about 3 to 1, and they had more weapons and sometimes better weapons than we had. We had allowed ourselves at the end of the Second World War to let our military deplete, but we drove them back out of South Korea, back into North Korea. And
now, who was the enemy? Was it the Chinese or the North Koreans?
At the beginning, it was the North Koreans. The Chinese intervened when we had most of North Korea captured. Now, they'd been gathered there on the border, but we were never told that, the frontline troops. We were never told that they were there. Now, Army intelligence and the high officials, they did know. But I think that General MacArthur thought they would not attack, and he was a great leader, great military tactician,
yeah.
but that time he was wrong. They did attack, and it was a surprise attack. We were taken unaware. My company was sitting 5 miles out ahead of the main battalion on an outpost, and they just bypassed us and pinned us down. They could take us anytime they wanted to.
So you were just like a sitting duck, weren't you?
Yes. They knew they could take us. Sometime during that night, they did. I was hit with something. I've never known what. I had a huge knot on the back, right side of the back of my head, where I, years later, had a brain tumor that the doctor said that I couldn't survive, but I'm here. And it was because of the miracle-working power of God.
Yes.
But then I was taken prisoner and taken into North China and escaped from there in the midst of several miracles.
Tell us about what happened when the Chinese took your, I guess, much of your company and some of the other men that were there on the front lines, prisoner of war, took you over into China. What happened? What did they do to you?
Well, the first thing they did, they tried to get as much information out of us as they could, and to the credit of those men, they didn't break. They didn't give them anything. And I was determined. Now, they, for some reason, thought that I was with the intelligence department. They claimed I was captured with 2 intelligence officers, whom I never saw. But, of course, they kept the officers and the enlisted men separated. But they wanted me to make a radio broadcast accusing the United States of participation in germ warfare and committing atrocities against the civilian population of North Korea, which did not happen, not deliberately. Now, no way are you going to not have civilians killed in war, but we did not deliberately do it. They did. They drove their women and children in front of them to keep us from opening fire on them until they got in close where they could use their fast automatic weapons. But we didn't use such tactics as that. But anyway, I told them, you can't make me do that. There's nothing you can do to make me do that. I will not be a traitor to my country. So they set about to prove to me that they could do it. They kept me there strapped in a straight back chair, looking into a bright light against a wall with bright colors rotating on it. And for you young people that think that this psychedelic thing started with rock music, think again. It started in the laboratories of Moscow, Russia. But anyway, they started playing the text of this broadcast they wanted me to make. And when they first started that, I thought, if you guys think this is going to work, you're crazy. And so it went all day. I wasn't allowed to close my eyes, couldn't let my head drop. And middle of the second day, I found myself repeating 2 or 3 of those words. And for the first time, it dawned on me, yes, they are going to make you do it, and you won't even know when you did it. And then I hit on a secret. I thought, I don't have to listen to this junk. I can shut them off. But I knew if I did, I had to fill my mind and my spirit with something stronger than anything they could do. Now, I set myself so that if anything was said that wasn't on that tape, or one of the interrogators said something, I would come back to, But I started quoting every verse of Scripture I could remember.
In your mind.
In my mind. Nobody knew I was doing it. And I got down to, in that third day, I couldn't remember but just John 3:16. But I said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that if Dallas, I put my name in there, will believe in him, he will not perish, but have everlasting life. And I said it over and over and over and over. And it was like a record hung up in a groove. I think I could have sat there for days and days, and that one would not have left me.
And they never let you up from the chair. I mean,
No,
they
I
kept
was
you
not
tied.
out of that chair for any reason that 3 days. They gave me a little water a couple of times, but that was all. And so finally, they came and cut me loose, and I could tell they were furious because it hadn't worked. They took me outside, spread-eagled me on the ground, tied my arms and legs, to stakes, and the feet, and drove a stake against the top of my head and some against both sides so I couldn't move my head, and started water dripping from a tank way up high, just a drop at a time, and hitting me right in the middle of the forehead. And when that started, I thought, well, this is nothing. But after only about 5 minutes of that, those drops of water began to feel like stones hitting my head. But again, I hit on a secret. That water hit my head, and I said, Jesus. Now, not out loud. Nobody knew I was saying it. Every time that water would hit me, I'd say, Jesus, 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 Jesus. And I just floated off into another world. Wasn't even aware of that water anymore. Of course, that didn't make them happy. They came and cut me loose, threw me into another room, laid me face down on the floor, pulled my arms back this way, the legs up this way until they came together, and then looped this rope around my neck so that if my hands or my feet went down, it would tighten the rope around my neck, and I would strangle myself to death. And I was determined that I was not going to kill myself. But yet I did, and I say it very sincerely. It had ripped this left shoulder out of its socket, and I begged God to let me die, but I wasn't going to do it myself. And I don't know what happened. I just kind of left.
Kind of went unconscious.
And then they came and got me. I'm convinced they thought I was dying. And they threw me in the black room, a little room where there's no light. And I was laying there in the floor, convinced that I was dying. And I said, Lord, I'm coming home now. And he spoke to me just as clearly, and he said, no, not yet. That's all he said. No, not yet. But then all of a sudden, that pitch dark room was flooded with the most beautiful light. And I could see forms in that light. I'm sure it was angels. And I don't know how much longer, how much later it was. I probably went unconscious, but they came and got me and threw me back in the compound with the rest of the prisoners. And one of the prisoners who had been trained in as a paramedic got my shoulder back in socket. Of course, he couldn't do anything about the muscles and all of that had been torn. But then sometime later, the march north started into China. And further
This is
into
where
China.
they took you and some of the prisoners, began to march you north into China.
Well, yes. At the time that this last incident took place, we were already in China.
Okay.
But they were taking us somewhere else. I don't know what they had in mind because they didn't discuss that with us. We weren't allowed to converse with one another. And we were walking along, and one of the prisoners, one of the soldiers, American soldiers, immediately in front of me, had been hit 3 times in his right leg, gunshot wounds, and he hadn't gotten any treatment to mount to anything. He was on the verge of going into shock, and he fell. And I grabbed him with this one arm because I couldn't use the left arm and got him back to his feet again. And he went a little piece further and went down the second time. Oh, and I got him up again. But when he went down that second time, one of the guards moved right up beside him, and he turned back and looked back at me and yelled something. I'm sure he was saying not to touch him. And he went on a little space further, and he started down the third time, and the guard took the rifle by the barrel and swung it at his head. And I kicked him, the guard, I mean, and we were in the middle of a steep inside curve, like this on this little narrow road. And I ran and dived over the side of the mountain, and I was tumbling head over heels down that mountain. Now, there were some scrub bushes sticking out, and I could have grabbed some of them to help break the fall, I guess, but I knew if I did, because they were already shooting, and some other guys had come over when I did, some of the other prisoners. And so I just kept falling. I hit on the bottom, and then a body on top of me, and another body, and another body, and another body, till I was completely covered over. And I remember waiting a good length of time and saying to them, guys, whispering, guys, don't move. I'm sure they couldn't hear me way up there where they were, but I didn't want to take the chance. And I whispered to them, guys, don't move. The only chance we've got is if they leave us for dead. And I waited quite a while, and then I took a big, deep breath, held my breath, and listened. And the sickening horror when I realized I couldn't hear any breathing anymore. Mm. I didn't feel any movement anymore except those little spasmodic things that happens when life's leaving the body. And I waited a while longer and got out from under the pile of bodies, checked them all. They were all dead. I was soaking wet from my head to my feet in blood. It was 20 below zero. Mm. And I knew if I survived, I had to generate body heat. So I started climbing back up that mountain. I only had the one arm to help me, and of course my legs. And I got back up on that little road and started back in the direction we came from. Not on the road, but near the road where I could see it. And came up to the Yellow River, Y-U-L-U River, that separates North Korea from Manchuria and Siberia. And I looked down, saw that river and that pontoon bridge. And the enemy troops was going back and forth across on that bridge. And I said, Lord, how am I going to get across that river? And all of a sudden, quicker than I could bat my eyes, I was across the river and across a big mountain range. I don't know how far south I hit, but I hit somewhere way south. And then I came close to the American lines. I heard the American artillery. I recognized the sound of those big 155 howitzers firing. And I said, that's Americans. And for the first time, I took off in the daytime because I didn't want to try to get through the American lines at night. I had on this old Chinese quilted uniform, and at a distance, I guess I looked as much like a Chinaman as anything else. But one of the American soldiers spotted me about the time I spotted him, but he shot at me. And for the first time in my life, I was glad that an American soldier was a lousy shot. Either that or he was a very good shot, because he just took a little piece out of my ankle.
Wow.
And I went down and managed to convince them that I was...
With that North Carolina accent.
Yes.
That you were one of the good guys. Well, stay right where you are. We'll be right back. More from Dallas Plemmons.
Hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings. You know what I'm talking about. Well, help is on the way, 'cause the doctor is in the house tomorrow on Joni.
You may contact Joni's guest by writing Dallas Plemmons Ministries, P.O. Box 2213, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452, or call 1-757-486-0001. You may also email him at dallaszoni@aol.com.
Well, I know you've been sitting there in the edge of your seat listening to Dallas Plemmons share his story. Thank you so much, Dallas. Again, your book, the whole story, Hell in the Land of the Morning Calm. Quickly, 10, 15 seconds, what would you like to say in closing to those that are watching?
I don't know what kind of problems you have or how hopeless you might feel that you are. There is hope, and that hope is in Him. And there's no problem you can get into, no situation you can get into that He can't reach you if you'll call on Him. Just call on Him, believe it, receive it, and it'll be yours.
And you can testify now to how many years since that experience in the foxhole that you met Jesus. How many years have you served Him?
I've been ministering for 53 years.
53 years. Awesome. Well, Dallas Plemmons, God bless you. We love you. There's a prayer line number on the screen. Call us today if you'd like for us to pray with you. I know you've been inspired. I know you've been encouraged. And we'll see you next time right here on Joni. Bye-bye for today.
Thanks for joining us today for Joni. Joni would love to hear your suggestions or comments, so drop her a line at P.O. Box 612066, Dallas, Texas 75261, or call 1-800-329-0029. For more information on The Joni Show, log on to our website at www.daystar.tv and click on Joni.
This has been a Daystar television production.
The agony of war. Seeing your closest friends die. If it was hard for you to watch in a movie theater, try living through it in real life. Next on Joni.
Imagine lying under a pile of dying men for hours and listening to the breath leaving their bodies one by one until you are the only one alive. Then try to fathom crawling out from under those bodies with your own clothes soaked with blood and struggling to make your way through enemy territory in sub-zero temperatures. Ahead of you is a wide river, steep mountains, and a jungle with prowling tigers. It sounds like the wild imagination of a Hollywood scriptwriter, but sadly, it is completely true. Recently, we taped a program with Korean War veteran Dallas Plemmons. At the end of that taping, I kept the cameras rolling and asked him to share a few more war stories with my staff. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. What you're about to hear will amaze and horrify you, but it may also change your life forever. But Dallas, if you would tell the guys, because they didn't get to hear your testimony this morning, some of the ones that are in here now, what happened. It was a 3.5-month period before you reached friendly territory. From the time that you fell over the side of the mountain, all of your comrades that fell on top of you were murdered, were killed by the Chinese soldiers. You were the only one. You crawled out from underneath the soldiers in 20 below temperatures, right?
Yes, most of the time.
And you really then took a trek back to get to friendly territory. It took you, did you say, about 3.5 months?
About 3 months.
So tell us what happened right after when you came out from underneath that pile of bodies and you got up on the road. I mean, how did you know what to do? I mean, what did you say to the Lord? I mean, how did He lead you? How did you know what to do?
Well, what I was doing was following the road back to where we came from. Of course, I wasn't on the road. I was close enough till I could see the road, but not be on the road. And I hid in the daytime, traveled at night. I found any place that I could hide, and discovered something very strange. Like I said, I had on that Chinese quilted uniform. It was warmer than anything our troops was ever issued. But I found that if I could get enough of anything between me and the snow to keep my body heat from reaching the snow, that I'd actually get warm. And that sounds ridiculous, but I really would.
So, like, would you get, like, leaves and tree branches?
Whatever I could find.
To put between you and the snow, and you just kind of, like, make a little cocoon almost?
Mm-hmm.
And so you travel at night?
Traveled at night.
And sleep during the
hid
day?
in the daytime. And
so
managed to get all the way through North Korea.
What was the some of the first stops that you had, as far as like some of those first nights? What'd you do for food?
Well, we had been taught some survival techniques. I knew some things, like the inside bark off of certain trees and roots. And now and then I'd run across one of these Chinese cabbage patches where they'd been cut off at the top, and I could dig the roots out and eat those. And I'd found a sharp, it wasn't real sharp when I first found it, but I managed to make it sharp. And it was kind of a flint-like stone. And I used that to, I could catch rabbits because the snow was deep and they couldn't run. And I would catch those and skin them and eat them just raw. I didn't actually eat the meat, I just chewed it and spit it out, but I was getting nourishment from it. And things like that.
Now, I know there was an incident where you came upon a North Korean home. Actually, I guess the man of the house.
Well, the man came across me.
Tell me about that.
And it turned out he was a Presbyterian Christian. And they took me into their home. And for the first time in all that long period of time, I was warm. I had hot food. I don't know what it was, didn't care.
I bet it tasted wonderful.
It did. And, but I left before the sun came up, long before, because I knew if I was caught there, if I was seen there, that they would kill that whole family. And so I didn't want to endanger them, so I left. And
Now, during that whole 3 months, was that the only night that you actually stayed in a
time.
home? Amazing.
Yes.
Now, there's also an incident where you found a cave. Tell us about that.
Well, I was looking for a place to hide, and I saw this black spot against the side of the mountain where the ice and snow was. And I thought, well, that could be a cave. And so I made my way over to it, and it was. And but it turned out it was a tiger's den, and he was evidently gone on his night hunt. And I was leaning up against the side of the cave like that, and I was asleep. Now this sounds weird, but I'd reached the point that I could be asleep and not asleep. And all of a sudden I knew something was wrong. And I just crawled up to the edge of the cave and looked out, and here comes this big Siberian tiger. And he looked like he was 14 feet long. I'm sure he wasn't anywhere near that long, but this high. He had me cut off. There was no way I could get away. So I just stood up and pointed at him, and I said, "Lord, turn that thing around." And his tail went like this a few times. And usually when they do that, they're going to attack. And the ears come forward. House cats do that.
Mm-hmm.
But then he just turned and went back around the side of the mountain.
Wow.
Of course, I took off and got out of his territory. But,
wow. That was just another miracle of your story.
well, God knew I'd be sitting here today.
Telling it. So now let's go back again to the river, because when you told me this, I know some people would think, well, there's no way that happened. I can't believe that. And yet, in the Bible, we know that there were people who were translated.
Well, I didn't tell it for many years for that very reason, because I thought people wouldn't believe it. But if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't have believed it.
So here you are, is it the Red River?
Yellow, Y-U-L-U, Yellow River.
The Yellow River, okay. You get to that particular river, and you have got to get across to get to friendly territory. You're on the wrong side.
Well, actually, to get into North Korea.
To get in North Korea.
That wasn't friendly territory, but
It was friendlier than where you were?
I still had to go south.
Right.
Well, no, the North Koreans weren't any friendlier than the Chinese. If anything, they were harsher.
Wow.
But as far as I know, they didn't detect me at all through the whole of North Korea. I don't think I was, except that night I spent in the house with the Presbyterian Christian family.
Okay, so there you are at the river. What happened? What did you say to the Lord?
I said, "Lord, how am I going to get across this river?" And the next consciousness I had, I was across it. And it was a steep mountain range, and I was thinking, how am I going to get across those mountains? And I was across both of them. Now, the G2 people back in Japan, when they were putting me through debriefing, was saying that I couldn't have covered that length of that much territory in the length of time that I said, or at the time that I came back into their hands. I couldn't have covered that much territory under the circumstances, which makes me believe that I hit much further south when he brought me over, not just over that mountain range. But anyway, there were other things that they couldn't explain. I gave them details that they knew I had to have been there, to have known what camps looked like, that they had evidently taken from
Aerial shots.
the air. And they knew I couldn't have known without being there.
They couldn't explain how you survived. Were there any other survivors that we know of? Any other American survivors that were taken into China that came back?
No,
So
not that I've heard of. I'm the only one.
Amazing. So they didn't really know what to do with you politically. Why?
Well, because they'd have to answer to the American people. And in addition, maybe start another war that would cost thousands and thousands of lives. And since they denied they had them, and they didn't have evidence that they had them, there was really nothing they could do. But
Well, tell me quickly about Packy.
well, this little guy, we were clearing the North Korean capital.
But this is after you got back.
No.
No, this is before.
As we were making our
Okay.
advance north. And we were going street to street, clearing the pockets of resistance that was left behind. And I heard this noise. I was taking my platoon down the street. And I heard this noise over under a pile of rubble. And I motioned to 3 of the guys to go around this way and 3 that way. And we started converging on the spot. And I saw this little hand sticking out from under some old tin and things. And I said to the guys, don't touch anything, because they would booby trap babies and children just to get at us. And I said, don't touch anything until we make sure that this hasn't been booby trapped. And when we were as sure as we could be that they weren't, I eased up and tried to give him a chocolate bar. But he was so frightened, he was just shaking, just trembling, because they'd been told all kinds of tales about what we would do to them, and they had no way to know it wasn't true. And so finally, his little hand went out and grabbed the bar, and he was just about eating it, paper and all, and I got it and got the paper off of it. And then one of the other guys came up with another one. I said, no. We're going to make him sick. Don't, he was just skin stretched over bone. And so I took him back to the kitchen personnel.
Now, how old was he? And who was he?
He was about 4 years old. Just a tiny little guy. His skin stretched over bone. Had them strain some oatmeal and different things, and we slowly then began to get him back to health. And the little guy just became my shadow everywhere I went. He was right with me. He got the name from, he was always lugging my stuff around, my boots, my web equipment, and, and they started calling him Packy. His name was Pock, P-A-K. But when they said it, it came out Pack instead of Pock, so we just called him Packy. And
And where did he come from, and why was he under that?
His
power
mother
of
and father were devout Presbyterian Christians
in North Korea.
And one day the communists came to their, and that took a long time for us to get this story, piece it together, because the only source we had was the little guy. And they came to his home and demanded that his mother and father renounce their faith, renounce Christianity. And they refused to do it. And the father said to them that he wouldn't do anything against his country, but he would not denounce his God. And so they beat them severely and left, warning them that they would be back and they'd better be ready to cooperate. And so the next day, they did come back, but in the meantime, the father was trying to get a bunch of things together and escape to the mountains with his family. But somebody in the village squealed on them, and that's the way, unfortunately, the communists work. And they came back earlier than they thought they would and caught them. And they tied the father and the little guy's two brothers to trees, and then they mass attacked the mother and then nailed her to another tree and skinned her alive in front of her husband and her sons. But they still refused, including the two younger boys, refused to deny their Lord. And when I think what little things, little picky things we deny him over. And so they took a pistol, put it to the head of the father and the two boys, and killed them. And then we never did find out exactly how the mother died, but I'm sure she died from what they'd already done. And the father had hid little Packy in one of these big earthen crocks that they used to make kimchi when he saw them coming, and told him to be quiet. Whatever happens, don't make any noise. And they either forgot about him or thought it wasn't important. And one of the men from the village, after dark, came across the wall and found the little guy and took him to an aunt's house in another village. And in a short time, they came and took her away, and then he just started down the road, ended up in the North Korean capital of Pyongyang, and was taken in by one of the beggar boy gangs. He couldn't really do anything much, but they had split a little bit with him, enough to keep him alive. And that's where we came into the story, where I found him.
So you told me that even at 5 years of age, that you shared Jesus with Packy.
Yes.
What happened?
I had been having services with the guys in the unit, because at that time we had a chaplain that he was a mess. He could line out, cursing out, steal any man in our regiment. And then he'd put that thing around his neck, and that made everything all right. Well, it didn't with those men. And so anyway, I was having services. And after the service, one morning, I felt a tug at my sleeve, and I looked down. And It was little Packy. And he looked up at me and he said, Plemmons, Packy want Jesus. And I led that little Korean boy to Jesus. He witnessed night and day everywhere he went. Soldiers that I hadn't been able to touch melted when that little guy got a hold of him. And Korean adults, little children would gather around him and just be spellbound. And he'd tell them about his mother and his father and brothers, and that they're in this big, beautiful mansion. That's what started me on the orphanage thing. We named our first orphanage in Haiti for him, Packy Memorial.
What happened to Packy?
Well, he was, we were taking a hill, and artillery, we were back in reserve. I didn't let him come up on the line. We were in reserve, and artillery shells started coming in, and it was what we call a walking or rolling barrage, and usually they had infantry behind it. And I jumped out of my hole to go up to the top of the hill where I had some machine gun replacements to see if there was enemy troops coming behind it. And I heard one of the guys yell, Packy! And I turned, and the little guy was running behind me. And I yelled at him and said, Packy, get back in that hole. And he turned to run back to the hole, and a shell hit almost on top of him. And that little body was flying through the air. And I ran to him. His little right leg was ripped completely off. And I knew he wouldn't live. He was unconscious when I got there. After a while, he opened his eyes, and it was obvious at first that he wasn't focusing. But the first thing he seemed to notice was the fear in my face. And he reached out and patted my hand. And he said, Plemmons, you no worry. Packy be all right. He wasn't worried about himself. He was concerned about me. And I've used that so many times when I've had hard places in my life, you know. But then he said, war soon be over. And this is when we were going north. And I said, yes, Packy. He said, maybe by Christmas. And I said, I think so, Packy. It'll be over by Christmas. And then he said, I think I sleep a little now. Closed his eyes and went to be with the Lord. And I found myself, although I wasn't screaming orally, my spirit was screaming, why? Why, Packy? I don't understand this. Why, Packy? But I know why now. I've told this story in 52 nations of this world, and he's winning souls all over the world. And even the hard times turn into blessings if we'll allow them to.
If you're blinking back a few tears right now, we want you to know you're not the only one. As I mentioned at the beginning of the program, by the time Dallas Plemmons finished his story, my entire staff was weeping. If you would like to read more of his miraculous experiences during the Korean War, we'll tell you how you can get a copy of his compelling book, Hell in the Land of the Morning Calm. In the meantime, take care, God bless you, and the next time you see a veteran, remember to say thanks.
For more information about Dallas Plemmons, or to obtain a copy of his book, Hell in the Land of the Morning Calm, you may contact him by writing Dallas Plemmons Ministries, P.O. Box 2213, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452, or call 757-486-0001. You may also email him at dallaszoni@aol.com.
Okay, folks, my producers have gone back and dug deep into